guys, it's Cece, and today I'm here to talk about Doctor Who. So, about 2 months ago, I did a video about my top 10 favorite episodes of Supernatural, and the response to that video was great. I'm really glad you guys liked it, and a lot of people asked that I do the same thing for my top 10 episodes of Doctor Who. Now, before we get started, I want to say a couple of things about Doctor Who as a show. First of all, I consider it my favorite show, kind of on and off. I haven't liked the newer seasons as much, but it is still just always going to have this near and dear place in my heart, so I continue to consider it my favorite show. And the other thing is that I'm only going to be talking about new Who episodes, so that's from the 9th Doctor through onto the 12th, though I'm not going to talk about any of the 12th Doctor's episodes. Hint, hint. So with all of that in mind, let's just jump in. We're going to build up to my absolute most favorite episode of Doctor Who at the very end, and let's just jump right in and start talking at number 10. My 10th favorite episode of Doctor Who is Boomtown. Now, this one barely makes the list, but I had to include it. So Boomtown is an episode from season 1, and it is one of the few times that we get to see basically my favorite Team TARDIS together. Jack Harkness, Rose Tyler, the 9th Doctor, and Mickey Smith. Now, Mickey doesn't really get to be included very often, but this is the one time that he does. I just think there's so much to say about this episode and how much fun it is and how much chemistry these four people have together in protecting the universe. I know this is like a stupid episode, kind of, in terms of monsters. I mean, you have aliens that basically fart a lot, but getting past that, I still think it's a great episode and a great thing to think about in terms of the 9th Doctor's relationship to things and what kind of person the 9th Doctor was. I think this is a great episode for getting into that. His compassion, but also his rage. There's just so much in Boomtown that I love, and even though it's from the first season, which is kind of hokey, this is my favorite group of people from the TARDIS, and I just love watching this episode. Coming in at number 9, we've got Doomsday. So we're going from one of the happiest points with Rose to what I would consider the saddest point. So Doomsday is the finale of Series 2, which is my favorite series in the entire show. I absolutely love the dynamic of Rose and the 10th Doctor, and this episode, the first time I watched it, I was in like pain as I sobbed on my couch. And maybe that's not the recipe of a great episode for some people, an episode that makes you that upset, but for me, it worked because it meant that I had become so dedicated to these characters, and in particular the relationship between Rose and the Doctor, that it was just utterly heartbreaking. There's a certain kind of terrible sense that this episode makes as it pulls these two characters apart, and even though it is agonizing to watch, I think it's incredibly well written. It tugs at your heartstrings. I think that it is superb. At number 8, we have got Turn Left. This is from Series 4, and it is an episode with Donna where the reason this is on my list is because it hits that point in season 4 where everything changes. Usually I don't care about episodes of television where the whole plot is, what if you hadn't done this one thing, what would be different? But I think this is such a wonderful episode for Donna as a character after you've been able to see her grow for an entire season, and it is where the kind of tip-off point for the end of Series 4 is, where all of a sudden you're like, oh, here's Rose again. And Rose, as my favorite companion, obviously, I was very excited. We just don't get to see companions interacting as often as I would like, and Series 4 was great for that. We got to have a couple of episodes of Martha and Donna interacting, and then we got this episode of Rose and Donna interacting, and it was just so nice to start to pull together all of these worlds from the past few series that you'd watched. I absolutely adore this episode. At number 7, we have A Good Man Goes to War. This is from Series 6. It's the mid-season point. Now, I just mentioned my utter love for Rose Tyler. If there's another character that I have that amount of passion for, it is definitely Rory Williams. This is just such a good episode for all of these different characters that come together, and I think it's a really exciting episode. Now, like I said, I prefer Russell T Davies era stuff because I think Moffat's storylines tend to focus a bit more on flash than on substance, but there's just something about this episode that gets me going. It also includes Vostra and Jenny, who are a couple of my favorite side characters. It's such a huge emotional point of change for these characters as they've evolved over this series together, and I love that high point that it hits. Even though it's hitting mid-season, it's just such a great crescendo to some of the storylines that have been building for that entire series. At number 6, I want to mention a two-parter, and that is Silence in the Library and Forest of the Dead from Series 4. This episode has a lot of good, but let's be honest and just admit that the reason I love it so much is that it's the introduction of my girl Riversong. I love Riversong as a character so much, and I absolutely love this introduction to her character. The reason I think Series 4 is so great is because we get to see all of these really intense relationships start to build and cross over, which I appreciate so much because I think it ties the show together really nicely. I feel like I constantly forget the fact that Riversong was first introduced during Donna's season. This episode is heartbreaking. They managed to introduce a character at the beginning of one episode that you cry for at the end of the second episode. It's creepy and interesting, and it has a really cool setting, and these two episodes just go together so well and make up such a strong story. I love this episode for so many reasons. Of course, I love so many of these episodes for so many reasons, but with these two in particular, I feel like I always have to go back to the fact that this is the first time you see Riversong, and the introduction of this character is just really well done and gets you connected to her moving forward even though you have no idea the kind of character she's going to be. At number 5, I've got Parting of the Ways. This is the finale of Series 1. So I have to mention this one because it is the point at which, for me personally, the whole show changed. I knew of the concept of Doctor Who, I knew that he regenerated, but this was the moment that I finally got to see that happen and see how the show kind of deals with that, how it becomes something new constantly. I think the finale of this series works so well because it is done in such a subtle way as a build. That's one of the things that I prefer about Russell T Davies to Moffat, is that I feel like the build to the finale for Moffat is really hit over your head, and I love the subtlety that goes into building up to finale points with Russell T Davies. By the time it all happens, it makes sense and you see that the signs were there, but you don't quite know where it's headed the entire season, and to see all of these storylines come together and create this story that's emotional and exciting and interesting is just such a great payoff after a full series of television. I love the Ninth Doctor, and he will always have a super special place in my heart as my first Doctor, and his conclusion, I think, is just fantastic. At number 4, I've got kind of a weird one, and that is Tooth and Claw from Series 2. Now, like I said, the second series is my favorite one, and I had a very hard time picking an episode that I could just, like, use to highlight my love, but I guess I'm gonna go with this one. This episode is pretty close to the beginning of the series, and I think it's the point at which you start to see the chemistry between the 10th Doctor and Rose. They have so much great banter. You've got Rose trying to do an accent, you've got David Tennant using his real accent, hallelujah. Plus it has one of my favorite lines with the 10th Doctor going, "Books are the best weapons in the world, arm yourself," something like that when they're in the library, and, you know, I might like books a little bit. I think it walks a great line between being serious and silly and really letting you know how close the 10th Doctor and Rose are getting, how comfortable they are with one another. I just love their chemistry in this episode, and that's why I watch it over and over again. Coming in third place for my favorite episodes, I'm going to do another two-parter, and that is Stolen Earth and Journey's End, the conclusion of Series 4. I feel like I've mentioned a whole lot of Series 4, but I think it's a great series in general. Possibly my second favorite after Series 2. But the reason I love this two-parter is pretty similar to the reason I like Turn Left, which is the episode that comes directly before these episodes. It's that finally all of these characters that you've been getting to know for 3-4 series come together, and that is such a payoff for me. These characters that you've gotten to know, you don't just have to say goodbye to them, you get a last hurrah with them. These characters that I loved got to interact with one another. You got to see Martha working with Jack, working with Donna, working with Mickey, and it was just fabulous. And of course, nothing is ever going to hit me quite as hard as that moment when the 10th Doctor turns around and Rose is standing there at the top of the street and they just sprint to each other. It is so emotional to me. It is such a moment that's been building for so long. This person that the Doctor lost and he gets to see again actually see them. I just think pulling all of these characters together into one storyline was a great move and such a fabulous way to end the show, even if it broke my heart over and over again. Coming in second place, we've got kind of an obvious one, and that is Blink. This is from Series 3. It is the introduction of the Angels. I remember when I first started really getting into Doctor Who, I would talk to friends about it all the time, and one of the questions we would ask is, if you could show a person one episode of Doctor Who to try to get them involved in the show, which would it be? And the most common answer that we got was Blink, because it is such a great monster episode. It's an episode with a lot of mythology and one that kind of keeps popping up as the show goes on. And it's just really well written. Feel like I am giving Moffat way too many pats on the back right now. He can probably hear me. His head is big enough as it is. He doesn't need this. Even though this is an episode that has very limited appearances from Martha and the Doctor, it's also such a great episode of the show, and one that still carries the tone and the message of Doctor Who in general. You've got these one-off characters that appear and immediately endear themselves to you. You've got mythology and complexity and time, and there's just so much good. Plus, I absolutely love at the end Sally coming across the Doctor and Martha and they have no idea who she is and she has to kind of hand off her folder of information. I love when you get to catch the Doctor and one of his companions in the middle of an adventure and you don't really know what it is. It's such a small trope, but whenever those moments happen in episodes, it makes me really happy, and I just like to imagine all of the different things that they're doing that we don't see. It's just a really well-written episode, totally worth the hype that it gets, and I love it. And we are at the end. My number one favorite episode of Doctor Who ever is Vincent and the Doctor. So this is from Series 5, which is not my favorite series by far, but I think this is such a high point for the series, such a high point for the show. This is another one of those episodes that I've shown people out of context to kind of get them interested in what the tone of the show is and what the message of the show is, because I think it tells both of those things so well. This is just an episode that sits with me and one that comes to me sometimes while I'm sitting and doing other things. I'll remember this episode of Doctor Who and taking Vincent van Gogh to see his own museum, and it breaks my heart, but it does it so well. It's my favorite instance of going and seeing a famous person from the past in the show, which they do pretty frequently, but I think this is the time that it's done the best. I just appreciate the growing connection that everybody has in this episode with one another and how close they get and how emotional the episode is in general. I watch this constantly, even if I'm not in the middle of rewatching the show. I will just stop and rewatch Vincent and the Doctor because I think it is gorgeous. So there you go, those are my top 10 episodes of Doctor Who, but before you go, I thought I would share a couple of my honorable mentions. First of all, The Rings of Akhaten, which in general, in my mind, is kind of a mess of an episode, but the speech that the 11th Doctor gives in that episode was this moment for me of realizing how much the 11th Doctor had come to grow on me and how much I had started to adore him as a character. So even though I don't love Rings of Akhaten in general as an episode, that speech and that moment are just excellent. We've got the 11th Hour, which is the introduction of the 11th Doctor, and the moment when the show went through such an extreme shift in tone and production quality. But it's a great introduction to the 11th Doctor and establishing just how different this guy is going to be from the last Doctor. We've got the Idiot's Lantern from Series 2. This was another one that I almost put on this list because Rose and the Doctor are so great in it, and I just think they're so sweet. I would love to cosplay this episode with her big dress and the Doctor's greased back hair. We also have Angels Take Manhattan, which again, in terms of like when you actually think about it, it doesn't make a ton of sense as an episode, but it's got great monsters with the angels coming back and Amy and Rory's story concluding the way it does. I just fell so deeply in love with them, and I think this is the episode that I cried second hardest during. Doomsday will always be my number one, but I sobbed through Angels Take Manhattan. And finally, New Earth, and that is the first episode of Series 2, the one after the Christmas special, where you just start to get to know the relationship between Rose and the 10th Doctor. It's just great, plus you get to have, You get to have David Tennant acting like Cassandra, which is a glorious image that will never leave me. So those are my honorable mentions, plus my top 10 favorite episodes of Doctor Who. What do you think of my choices? Please let me know in the comments below, and let me know what a few of your favorite episodes of Doctor Who are if I didn't mention them. Thank you so much for watching. If you are interested in more of these top 10 episode videos, please let me know some shows that I should do. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!